On this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out, the panel discussed the controversial comments from Carey Price and what ramifications this will have on the organization on the ice and off of it, and also their thoughts on the 4-game Western road trip and what they take away from that as they move towards the home schedule that they have coming up. And finally, that choke job in Vancouver. Does this have a profound impact on the reality of what the team is looking like moving forward? This plus the bonus questions on this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out. And welcome into a new episode of Hockey Inside Out. I'm your host, Mo Connor, alongside with Andrew Berkshire, Rick Green, and Jack Todd, who's replacing Stu Count for this week's episode. Gentlemen, let's dive into it. The controversial comments from Carey Price created a bleep storm for the team off the ice, and what could be a big thing moving forward here. What's your takeaways, guys, with Carey Price for what he said? And of course, in Canada, you are given the right to be for or against whatever it is. But in this case, this really brought up a bad time for what happened, given it was the anniversary of the Montreal Massacre earlier this week.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers, to this onion. Unfortunately, very poor timing from Carey Price, especially in regards to the organization that he supported in that Instagram post, using the victims and survivors Twitter account from the Polytechnic Massacre as a promotional code, I believe the week before the Polytechnic Massacre anniversary. I don't believe that Carey Price knew about that situation because he's just not an extremely online person. I think there was clearly a miscommunication between him and the Montreal Canadiens with the initial statement saying that he didn't know about the incident at all beforehand, which frankly was not believable to be a Montrealer for 15 plus years and not know about that. It strained belief completely. And I think that initial statement from the Canadiens just made people more upset because it made no sense. And then Joel Edmondson's comments were extremely insensitive as well, backing your teammate no matter what. And we don't know what happened 30 years ago. I think my takeaway from this is multi-layered. First of all, Carey Price, especially as an Indigenous Canadian, has every right to hunt, but he was clearly misinformed about what is going on in this legislation. I know there are some gun enthusiasts that are worried that more guns are being added to the banned list, but I'm sorry, if you own a gun that's being banned and it's going to be bought back, you can just buy another hunting rifle. You're not going to be victimized and not able to hunt. That's not what's being made illegal. So everything that's against this is really slippery slope, but he has every right as an Indigenous person, especially, to hunt. That's part of his culture. That needs to be protected. And anybody saying that he shouldn't be hunting kind of needs to check themselves a little bit. But I do think that his time in posting it was extremely insensitive. He needs to answer for that for sure. I also think that the Instagram post doesn't read like it was written by Carey Price. It reads like it was written by the foundation or the coalition of firearms, whatever, Canadian Coalition of Firearms. I don't care for them. I think he was manipulated here a little bit, and that shows his naivety. But the Montreal Canadiens organization in totality needs to answer for this as well, because Joel Edmondson's comments are not acceptable. To say that the Montreal Canadiens are an organization that you can clock in and clock out at the end of the day and not know anything about the community that you're playing in is not an acceptable attitude for the Montreal Canadiens, especially for a leader on this team. He wears that A on his jersey. You need to be a member of the community here. This is more than just a hockey team. This is a cultural institution for the city of Montreal and the province of Quebec. We deserve better as citizens from these players. So the Montreal Canadiens need to educate their players on these types of situations. It can't be a surprise.
And I agree with Andrew as far as the timing of this. It was a huge mistake on his part, to come out with this type of post, and obviously upset a lot of people with good reason. But if anybody knows Carey Price, he didn't probably realize the type of pain that he'd be inflicting on a lot of people by making this type of statement. And the other area of concern that I have is when the Montreal Canadiens, France Belanger, had made the comment that he did not know about this this massacre, and then the following day Carey comes forward and says, "Yeah, I did know about it, and Unfortunately, looking back, that he probably would have voiced it differently. But anyways, the problem that I have is the miscommunication between the organization, which the Montreal Canadiens, for their history, has all been about image and making sure they do things right. And I have a problem with that type of miscommunication, as Andrew touched on before, between player and management, and that's not something that should be happening. And I think moving forward, there's going to be much more awareness of what comes out, which I thought they're pretty good on keeping a handle on what the players should say and should not say. But this just reinforces the point that they're going to have to pay closer attention to what's going on. And of course, high-profile guys, professional athletes, everybody taps into it, and you have to be very careful. So a lesson learned. It's unfortunate that this type of statement did come out, unacceptable. And, he's trying to backtrack like the organization saying, we should have handled it better, but it wasn't, intended to really hurt and bring up some pain, some more pain memories of people that were involved in
it. Speaking of people who were involved in it, I guess in a way I'm one of them. I don't know if you guys all know. I was one of the first reporters up on the mountain that night. The city editor had come around. I was just finishing a column on something else, and she said that there was a report of a shooting at the University of Montreal. And, had I not been born an American, I think I probably would have begged off and said I was going to dinner and something like other reporters were doing. But I grew up in a state where Charlie Starkweather went through on a murderous rampage in the 1950s, and I remembered another incident. A guy, I think his name was Richard Whitman, at the University of Texas, one of the first mass murders where he got up in a tower and shot people from the tower. So I reacted pretty much instantly. I was out of there and in a cab in 2 minutes. I got up there, and there was only one or two French radio crews. Nobody else was up there yet. And you couldn't find out anything. I mean, nobody knew really what was going on, only that there was a huge police presence. There were already a lot of ambulances arriving, so it looked bad. We were out there so long, I think it was raining when I got there. That changed to kind of wet snow. Nobody was dressed for it because everyone assumed they would be going to work that day and home by metro, so we were underdressed. It started to snow. I remember my feet were so cold. It was hard to think about anything but the cold. But gradually it dawned on you that something really bad had happened. And I remember we kept looking at these ambulances because we had seen 14 wounded people come out. And that actually made me optimistic because I thought if there were that many wounded, there couldn't be that many more who had been killed. And our photographer, Pierre Albenrauch, said to me around, 9:30 or something, he said, those ambulances that were still here are there for a reason. And we counted, and there were like 15 ambulances sitting there. And I went, oh, shit. And it wasn't long after that the police officer, I think it was the one who had lost his daughter in there, came out and informed us that there were 14 dead, and they were all women. And the aftermath of that was, I can't even begin to tell you how difficult it was. I visited the gun shop that week where Lepin bought his gun, wrote a column on that. I was surprised and appalled to know that there was even a shop like that in Montreal. I had thought that we were different somehow. And one of the things that happened in the aftermath was after the funeral, I covered the ceremony at the Basilica, Notre Dame, and a reporter I knew pretty well got onto the bus with the families, posing as a family member, so he could get the inside story of their grief. And I was so disgusted by that and some other things that that reporters did in the aftermath that I decided I was going to give up the column and possibly give up journalism for good. I was city columnist at the time, by the way. But then when I decided to stay on the job, I decided that I would sort of dedicate the column for as long as I wrote it to writing about misogyny, violence against women, and gun control. And I did. I think it shortened my career because, as a city columnist, because there's just such a daily deluge of depressing stories. I had women calling me with stories of abuse daily. And this went on for 3 years till I quit. So I give you this lengthy blah, blah, blah preamble just to say that I'm coming from a little different place. And I was just appalled when I saw Carey's Instagram post, the initial one. There were a couple of aspects of it that no one had touched on. And I actually think the whole thing wouldn't have become anything like the storm that it has if only Carey hadn't tagged anyone. But he tagged both the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, or whatever the hell it is, and the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. And there's a little tinge in there when you have a very big man in camo gear and a very large shotgun, and he tags the Prime Minister. There's a touch of intimidation there. I don't think Carey probably intended it, but that's one of the ways that it comes across. But the other aspect, which Andrew's already touched on, is just linking with this group. This is a really toxic group. Anybody who would think it's funny to use poly as a promo code, it's just despicable. I can't say enough bad things about that. And Carey should have distanced himself from that immediately. Excuse me. He had plenty of time to. I would say some of his statements are a bit unclear. It's unclear whether he only found out about the poly thing after he posted the Instagram. Either way, I think he could have denounced them for that. Saying he disagreed with it is pretty weak tea. He needed to come down on them, possibly to say, I've left the organization because of this. The organization is more the problem than his stance. His stance is a little bit dishonest in that, as an Indigenous person, his firearms aren't on the ban list anyway. I'm also told, according to the minister who's seeing this thing through Parliament, that specific type of shotgun is not on the ban list. So he's kind of talking about something that didn't affect him anyway. Had he just remained with it, hunted, exercised his rights as an Indigenous person, nobody would have a problem with it. What he did, and especially the back and forth and on and off, and then the kind of non-apology that was issued, just inflamed the whole thing. I think in the process, he's let down his team. He's let down the fans. He's let down the city. He's revealed that he learned basically nothing about Montreal in 15 years living here if he doesn't know how deeply this issue cuts in the city. And, his timing was wretched. Not only the Poly anniversary, which is bad enough, but he does this also when his team is about to play in Vancouver, which is where he was born, in the province where all this post and everything is happening. He promised in October, when he revealed that he probably wouldn't play this season and possibly never again, that he wanted not to be a distraction. And then he creates the mother of all distractions for the guys he's supposedly going to help. Going forward, I think this is going to have some consequences. I think the Canadiens are going to be reluctant about involving him in some things that he may have been involved in before. I don't think it will affect the Hall of Fame vote. If I had one, I wouldn't vote for him now, but that won't matter because most of the voters don't care about the poly or any of this. But I think where it's really possibly going to affect him is the question of retiring his jersey. I think we talked about it before. I would have said it was a slam dunk a week ago. Today, I would say it's doubtful because if the day comes when they want to make the announcement they're going to retire his jersey, the stink is going to start all over again. And a lot of people in this town, including me, are going to oppose it. So that's my very long statement on this, gentlemen. I'm sorry to make you sit through it.
No question. And it's definitely an emotional thing for all of us. I was a very young kid when this happened, this awful tragedy. It's a scar that will be forever in Montreal history, no matter how you look at it. And to go off of Jack's point, and Andrew brought the point as well as Rick, Carey Price's reputation, a twofold question here, guys. Carey Price's reputation, is it toxic where the team has to divest itself from him? And when you look at the Montreal Canadiens the last couple of years, the Logan Mailloux situation, and now this, where they botched the PR approach here, what do the Habs have to do to better educate these guys and make sure they don't fall into this PR trap as they did with Mailloux and now with Carey Price?
I absolve the organization more than Andrew did, just because I personally think that I can't imagine Bélanger going public with this unless he had told her himself. Why would she do that unless she had spoken to Carey or exchanged emails or something? And he misled her as to whether or not he knew about the poly. Yeah. So I don't blame them on that aspect. As far as education, yes, going forward, there does need to be more education, including about the poly. But I don't really blame them. You know, you have a guy, he's in long-term IR. He's not even in the province. He's out there. They couldn't have seen it coming. It's hard to predict all the stupid things that athletes might do especially when they're not around the team. I would like to see him distanced from the team. I saw Cole Caulfield was among those who liked the initial post, and here's this impressionable kid, and you want him to have a chance to learn about the city and everything without, one of the guys he respects most in the world being really on the very wrong side of things. So, but their options are going to be very limited here with him on long-term injured reserve. I think they would be able to park him like in Arizona or somebody that's looking for cap room or salary, as they did with Weber before him. But other than that, you're kind of stuck with the guy. I just don't know how much they're going to want, to invite him to team events and things like that. Rick would probably know better than I how these things work.
I just find it, very disappointing to see that, this lack of communication between management and Carey happened in such a critical, point. It's unacceptable for me. And, I go back to the years when I was working with the organization, and they were very, very strict on briefing us even back then when there wasn't as much of a high profile as we have today on what you should say, what you shouldn't say, and be careful about this because this is coming your way. And we were briefed and we were told, don't go there. Be careful on how you handle that one, just to protect the image of what comes from the organization. And it's disappointing to see that this type of event happened and played out the way it has, with contradiction of what was said and what wasn't said. And it's just it's another example of how they have to do some repair work on making sure that these avenues of communication, if you will, are much clearer and accurate.
Yeah, I think where the miscommunication may have occurred is that Price didn't know that the anniversary was coming up, and that got relayed to the team, and they didn't know about the massacre in its entirety. And I think not knowing that the anniversary was around the corner is a little bit more forgivable than not knowing that the massacre occurred in its entirety, right? Because I think anybody who's a parent of young kids, days sneak up on you, you don't know. And I don't think somebody who wasn't here for it, like Jack, has like the date circled on their calendar either, right? Like that I can understand and empathize with. It's, for me, Carey has to come out and say something about the organization that he aligned himself with because of what he, I will assume, did not know happened the week before with their promo code referencing this massacre and essentially antagonizing the victims and survivors of this incident because they had criticized the organization on Twitter weeks before that. I don't think that I disagree with it is good enough. I agree with Jack on that. I think that a full disavowal has to happen. He has to say with his heart that this is something that he cannot stand for. But I think what Rick brought up earlier is something we have to take into account as well, that as bad as this is, we've seen who Carey Price is through his words and actions for 15 years now. And I think assuming the absolute worst doesn't fit with Price's character. We know what he's done for Indigenous youths, how much he cares for young fans in general. It's a dicey situation, but I think everyone at this point, except for the people who are, gun fetishists, they want a little bit more from Carey to clarify what actually happened here and disavow this organization, the CCFR, because that is just not something that he should be aligned with the garbage that they pulled in the last several weeks here. So as far as him being distanced from the team, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, just because his track record kind of speaks for itself, and he is such a big player for that team. And I think the other thing is the NHL is a very conservative league. I think you look at the players who liked that post, even when it did tag the CCFR, Andrew Shaw was in there saying like effing rights, bud. Like, unfortunately, the more you hear some of these guys talk, and we always say we want to hear them talk, they have some opinions that the average person isn't going to like very much. So I don't see the distancing as something that's realistically going to happen, but we need more from Carey in this situation.
Finally, guys, with Carey Price, will he be forgiven for this, or will there be an asterisk now moving forward with whatever he does post-Montreal Canadiens?
Oh, I think for a lot of the study, there's always going to be an asterisk, but whether or not that portion of the population has any effect on the club is an open question. I think to most women in this country, I mean, if you in this city, if you've been on Twitter, people are just furious with him, and he has his really strong defenders, mostly male, and mostly not from Montreal. And honestly, the email I'm getting, which has been over 100 this week, is the things attacking my position mostly come from Western males. But in this city, he's got some definite image problems at the moment.
Rick?
And unfortunately, the damage is done. Now it's like, how can you, or if you can, do any type of repair to, to allow a little bit of relief for some of the people that he's really hurt. But it's a tough call. And again, the management has stayed pretty well, out of it. There hasn't been much come from them as far as, what they're feeling about how this was handled. And unfortunately, this is another indication where I don't believe they handled it right. Carey didn't handle it right. But they're going to have to make some corrections and try not to do it again.
And your final thoughts?
To step up and disavow the organization, and disavow in particular the use of the poly thing. He can still speak up for gun ownership or hunting rights or whatever without being a member of a very toxic organization. I think a lot of the problem here is the organization, not Carey or his position. If he would do that, and I think probably it would be useful if he came to town and faced the mob and explained himself. I'm not sure he's at all inclined to do that. That a couple of years ago, I think Angela had posted a photo just of him playing with one of his kids in his office, but somebody spotted on the wall of his office was a flag from this organization, and it has the maple leaf, and then there's a gun sticking out of the maple leaf, and the legend on it at the bottom is "No compromise," and apparently that's a slogan of the more extreme gun people, and it means just no deals on anything. In the U.S., we know what that means. It means, full automatics, anything you want, open carry. My sisters a couple springs ago were at a small demo with a bunch of, 70-year-old white-haired women on a Sunday morning, and a guy came and planted himself across the street with an AR-15, just, 100 feet away, and he wasn't quite aiming it at them, but the intimidation factor was there. We don't want to see that happen in Canada. And I think Carey needs to, pick some sides here and think a little bit more about which side he's on.
Andrew, final thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, I agree with Jack on that. Obviously, it's a different view on guns growing up, I think, out west than it is, growing up in the city of Montreal. Guns are seen more as tools out there, but the whole fetish around guns is something that we need to continue to talk about as a country, as a people, because, if, talking about them as tools, if somebody is a tradesman and their drill that they like that they bought last year, a warning comes out, hey, this drill could explode and it could kill somebody in your crew. So we're going to buy that back from you and you get to go buy a new drill. I don't think many tradespeople are going to freak out and start protesting the government. They might be a little bit upset if they really like the way that drill handles. They really like that tool. They're used to working with it. It might be upsetting, but they're not going to start protesting and talking about government trampling their rights if they have to go buy another drill. Nobody's outlawing all guns here. Nobody's saying that Carey Price can't hunt. At least nobody reasonable, right? There's always a few radicals that are saying like, you shouldn't be able to hunt, but hunting is not up for debate here. It's something that's going to continue to happen. It's part of, human culture in a lot of ways. So we need to continue talking about this. And Carey, he does need to say something. He needs to. It doesn't even necessarily have to be to the media, although that would be preferable. But he needs to make a stronger statement here.
Yeah. I have to say, in my own defense, I grew up out west. I had my first rifle when I was 10. I joined the National Rifle Association when I was 14 for their marksmanship classes. And by the time I graduated high school, I probably had 3 or 4 guns. And, you grow, you evolve, you change in different ways. But I do understand where Carey's coming from. All my relatives out there, most of them still hunt to this day. It's not a strange thing in that culture, but you have to make accommodations here for keeping people alive. Gun control works.
As we also review the Habs 4-game road trip where they went 2-1-1, 5 out of 8 points. Let's not forget the Habs also had that 4-goal choke job at Vancouver. A lot of pluses and minuses here for the Montreal Canadiens for what they did in Western Canada and also in Seattle. Rick, your takeaways on this whole road trip and what played out for them?
Listen, in spite of some of the hockey that they did play, which wasn't always the prettiest, when you go out and you get 5 out of a possible 8 points, pretty good, successful road trip. And who would have imagined that they were able to pull that off? But they started off in kind of a run and gun type of game in Calgary, figuring out that 46 shots against is not the kind of hockey they need to play. And of course, Edmonton, their penalty killing struggled with the Draisaitl and McDavid show, and they, if anything, realize that the type of games that they need to play, which is not sloppy defense like they did in Vancouver, where it was just like, are you kidding me? Here we go again. And it was just a disaster, obviously, to see them trying to control some of their defensive zone play. But, at the end of the day, they come back with a pretty successful road trip, all things considered. And again, just reinforcing the point, if you don't have good goaltending, you don't have a chance to win. And Allen did such a great job. And, as the goalie plays well, the success of the team goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I thought that the game in Vancouver, there are certain games that I think of as coaches' games. And I kind of imagine the coach standing behind the bench thinking, boy, this is great. Because that's the kind of game that you get to go in and say to your players, by the way, don't do that. And at that moment, they're more receptive than they are when, they've just won a game 6-5 or whatever. And this was a don't do that, what you did there game. Don't be on the wrong side of the puck. Don't get loosey-goosey with a 4-0 lead. Don't think that you're the 1977 Habs just because you happen to be up in the game. And I'm sure they would have been very receptive to that after that. It was a great result for the four-game series, and they probably should have had another point in Vancouver. On the other hand, there were 2 games they probably shouldn't have won and that Allen won for them. But a lot of people were going well. The one thing about the Vancouver loss where the team seemed really to sag to my eyes was when Monahan went down. And that's definitely the ongoing concern here because he was having a huge impact. You were kind of getting away from that one-line threat thing, and we're going to have to see how it goes if he's out any length of time.
Yeah, it was a weird road trip because overall successful, but ironically, I think they won the 2 worst games that they played and lost the 2 better games that they played. Against Edmonton, they actually controlled play every time the game was at even strength, but they just got into crazy penalty trouble. And I can't remember the last time I saw a team give another team 3 two-man advantages in 10 minutes. It makes no sense. And the whole team lost composure both in that game and the game against Vancouver. From Sam Montembeault, who's been spectacular this season, to literally every single player on the ice against Vancouver, just completely lost composure, made mistake after mistake when they were up 4-0. But again, in that game, they probably got pretty unlucky because they were the better team. But that's just the way hockey works sometimes. You win the games that you don't deserve to, and you lose the games that you deserve to, and at the end of the day, it kind of equals out over an 82-game season, and you get what you get. But overall, I think the lessons that we learned from that road trip is this is still a young team with a lot of flaws, and they'll win some and lose some. Sometimes they'll, on the second half of a back-to-back with travel, beat one of the hottest teams in the entire league, barely shooting at all. So it's just a fun sport, right? And I think it's nice to see Caulfield scoring again. He had a little cold streak there. The top line is still getting it done. And, you know, the goaltending seems to be off and on now after being red hot through October and mid-November. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes. But overall, I think that the team continues to play fun hockey. And it's fun enough to watch that I was staying up for the late games when I didn't have to. I didn't have to work those nights. And that was not something that I would say that I would do without getting paid for the last 5-6 seasons.
And it's when you
Here, guys. Go ahead, Greg.
No, I was going to say, when I've been there before, when you blow a big lead like they had 4 goals, lead, they're cruising along, everything was going their way, and then all of a sudden, the wheels came off, and it's like, hang on, we got ourselves in big time trouble. And a lot of times when those things do happen, it's a test of character of your team for their next game, because that, blowing the lead, then losing the game the way they did, it hurts. And the following game in Seattle was a big question mark in how they're going to respond to something like that. And they obviously handled themselves fairly well, and were able to pull off a win again, thanks to Alan, that did a good job. But they're learning. You got some guys that are experiencing some up and downs, which is typical. And even looking at the Vancouver guys, Matheson has a blowout. He needs to get his snow tires on sooner than later, along with Jack-Eye. He seemed to have the same problem with his tires on 2 of the goals. So these are all learning curves, and there's something that is to be taken from those games, and figure out that in order for them to have success, they have to really shore up their defensive zone play, cut down on the high-risk type of play, and just be very solid in their D zone. And they're capable of doing it. We've seen it before. And, the end result here is they had a pretty good trip all in all.
I was going to say quickly here, guys, when Shane Wright had scored for the Kraken, I was like, oh, my God. This guy's going to score 5 goals against the Montreal Canadiens, and we're going to have a big debate on this week's episode. But when you look at the injuries right now that they've sustained, Monahan out for who knows how long, can they still play decent hockey, losing some key pieces to the lineup when they go into this month of December with what's left of 2022 calendar year?
I've still got that top line. That's the main thing, right? As long as that line keeps kicking and the goaltending doesn't fall out from under them too bad, they can still win some games.
Jack?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Monahan, to me, is the key. The other absences, I don't think, are a huge factor in terms of their ability to compete. They can take it with him out for 3 or 4 games. If it's 3-4 weeks up, then it's really going to hurt. But I just like it doesn't matter to me whether they win or lose. I like the way this team is playing. As long as they keep playing the way they are, never quitting. That's one of their trademarks. Having fun on the ice, staying loose, but working really hard. And you see several of the guys just, the upward leap in what they're learning. And some like Gooley doesn't seem to have anything he needs to learn. Harris, I thought, played really well on this trip, especially in Seattle. So just keep it up. And if you lose a few because you're missing guys, it's still part of the process.
And their top line is continuing to be their top line each and every game, and they're carrying a huge part of their success. And providing those guys stay healthy, I don't see any reason why they're not going to continue on their on their very good play, and finding ways to be great offensively. And then you add the supporting cast of some guys chipping in. Just keep on going, guys. There's a lot more positive than negative in what we've seen to date.
And I think we could also, as much as they did blow the 4-goal lead, most teams that do that completely fall apart. So they had enough left in the tank at the end of that game to take the lead back. And yeah, they did lose it and lose in overtime. Kind of a fluke penalty call to create that situation for the Canucks. And, obviously the goaltending had fallen apart by then, but, some due credit for getting back into the game when it seemed like everything had completely fallen apart, which I think is one of those things that a young team can do, right? Where they almost don't know that they're beaten. And that's always fun to watch too.
And also have to give, hats off to Martin St. Louis, who probably downplayed the fact that was a disaster and we could be in damage control for our next game. So he kind of sloughed it off and said, it wasn't pretty. We just got to get better, and he put more of a positive spin than a negative, and obviously the guys responded to that.
Well, Canadiens had a successful road trip. They'll be home this weekend to the LA Kings, and they'll have a few more road games towards the end of the calendar year, which we look forward to breaking down with you on Hockey Inside Out. Well, that would do it for this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out. Don't forget to send us your questions, your comments on Hockey Inside Out, and we look forward to conversing about that in a future episode. And like on our YouTube page for Hockey Inside Out, and sign up to the newsletter on MontrealGazette.com/newsletters. And for full episodes and for bonus content, check out Hockey Inside Out. On behalf of Jack Todd, Andrew Berkshire, and Rick Green, wish you a great week. We'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.